if you could pay them and did pay them 12 an hour and they were there full time, how much can you use them?
But I see many individual appraisers will talk about doing some kind of a fee split arrangement with a trainee. In episode 7 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff, we're talking money. Everybody cares about the money. If you're an employer, if you're an existing appraiser looking to expand, if you are an aspiring appraiser, how do you pay for PAREA? Is it too much? Does it not cost enough? And where are the funding sources available to help get through that?
First and foremost is touching on the 3 or 4 places that there are funds available for prospective PAREA students to access to pay for the cost of the program.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. It's been interesting, and I've had some insights as we have talked through or just kind of thought through some scenarios of what's the cost. And part of this has been born out of some criticism, I think, at the national level about the cost of PAREA to go through it. It's much more expensive than the qualifying education that you have to take. Obviously, test taking is kind of the third barrier to entry or hurdle you have to clear. Is not expensive, but PAREA is multiple times what the cost of those other 2 requirements are. So that makes sense, and maybe it makes sense to just talk through what the costs are initially, and then we can think about some reference points and kind of point of comparison. You had looked it up. Remind us what the total cost is.
Yeah, so one provider of that presently, we heard Appraisal Foundation president last episode talking about that another provider may be coming down the pipe here at the end of the year, but right now the Appraisal Institute is the only provider. The cost per module, there are 2 modules: licensed residential, certified residential. The licensed, each module is $4,425 for the entire module. If you are a member of the Appraisal Institute, there is a $430 discount. And so the cost, if you are a member or an affiliate with the Appraisal Institute, it is $3,995.
Perfect. That's each module. So if you're going to go to certified residential, it's 2 of those basically. So you're essentially $8,000 if you're an Appraisal Institute member, $8,850 if you are not an Appraisal Institute member. We should have a policy of not doing like math in public off the top of our heads, because I can work a 12C pretty good, but I'm not great on mental math sometimes. But yeah, so exactly right. And one of there are a couple of ways to, I think about this, but one of the things that was interesting to me is I was having a conversation with my brother who runs and hires appraisers in just a kind of a small local, firm. And he was talking about having hired somebody approximately 2 years ago and just kind of going through the mental math on his end of what they had paid. And in that model, it's just a kind of a low hourly wage, $12 an hour, I think was what he had referenced. And so as he was thinking through that, on an annualized basis, I think that worked out to somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 a year that he was paying to have a trainee on staff to work through the process. Over time, they become productive and can contribute something. But in talking with him, this trainee that they'd hired 2 years ago, they're about 2 years in. He's recently been licensed, now working towards getting certified, isn't getting a lot of work that he can produce on his own as a licensed appraiser. Some non-lending jobs and that sort of a thing. But the cost 2 years in is approaching $50,000, and he's not yet certified residential and able to generate a lot of revenue. And so my brother was saying, well, geez, I would way rather, even as the firm, pay for someone to go through both modules of PAREA and be into it, $800 to $8,800 in cost, hire them at that point. And then I've got somebody who certainly still needs tutoring and mentoring on a lot of the business administration, a lot of the practical day-to-day stuff in appraisal, but has the license and the credential that's ready to go. And as he was approached by somebody else, that is the plan, on the next hire. It hasn't been executed yet, but he's willing to help front that cost because he sees it as a more cost-effective way from the employer side to get somebody credentialed so that they can start working as an appraiser much more quickly from his perspective as the employer.
So Jeff, what I think, to summarize what I think I heard there, is that at $12 an hour and roughly 18 months, you are into the cost of training somebody and helping them get to certified residential of upwards of $35,000 or $40,000 at $12 an hour. You pay more, obviously that goes up. And so if someone can come in already having the license in hand for a cost of $8,000 or $9,000, it's sort of a no-brainer to have that happen. Not to mention that, especially in residential appraisal, it is very hard to use a trainee in the process. Lenders don't make this very easy. Oftentimes they aren't allowing a trainee to perform certain tasks in the process, and have all sorts of reasons for that, where they're selling loans to and all those sorts of things. But that's often what we hear. And so if you could pay them and did pay them 12 an hour and they were there full time, how much can you use them in those processes? You got to have a pretty nuanced approach to the business to be able to use them well.
That's exactly right. And most of the time it turns into being a paid shadow. And I've seen there are those that don't want to pay a trainee anything. There are those that want to charge a trainee for the learning experience. I mean, offering to pay them an hourly wage is not the only way that trainees get into the process, but that's exactly right. And it's not for any fault of the trainees, but there's only so much they can contribute and do on a per assignment basis. Whereas if they step in that certified role, even that can be challenging. Some lenders or some users of appraisal services want to have a minimum number of years certified. However, you're much more accessible, or you have better access to work with that certification than only as with the trainee credential, like you said.
And then can participate in the entire process because you have the certified the certification there. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think one of those suggestions or ways to approach these PAREA graduates and students is for appraisers who are interested in expanding their practice, getting with these prospective students early on in the process and offering to cover those expenses, and then play the waiting game for them to get through the program and be ready to go by the time they're graduated and then hit the ground running. And if you do that, it is an alternate pathway to making this happen. And I think a lot of these PAREA graduates, this is the best place for them, because while they are getting very deep appraisal theory training, what is lacking most likely is the professional guidance that happens often during the training period. And so these folks should be lining up with appraisers and offices, and in a lot of cases, where they can get that professional guidance on the job with certification in hand and ability to participate in the process fully when that happens. And so, it's a little less than a $10,000 investment over a period of 12 months or maybe a little more to have somebody come in and do that. But I think that's a really natural way that the pathway, this alternate pathway, settles in to help both the PAREA graduate and license holder and appraisers that exist in the marketplace.
Yeah, exactly right. In fact, I had conversations recently with somebody in your state of Texas who's looking to do that very thing, has a potential hire identified. That hire is going through PAREA right now, going to start with her as soon as she gets out of the PAREA with the credential. And in this particular case, the certified appraiser hasn't quite been certified for 3 years, so couldn't be a trainer anyway, even if she wanted to. But it's a natural way to go forward, like you say, and it may seem a little crazy even to suggest that a firm or an existing appraiser would pay for the cost of PAREA. But I'm just, my perspective is simply that, having talked to somebody who's paid a trainee on an hourly basis, they're saying, hey, that would be a much more cost-effective way to get somebody who I can start running with. I expect that in a lot of scenarios, what'll happen is the applicant is going to end up paying for the courses, but for those in a firm that are looking to grow or expand, again, maybe crazy to talk about in this environment, but we don't stay in great environments for too long. We don't stay in terrible environments forever either, even though it feels like it when you're going through it. But it's definitely a pathway to get there. And Mark, maybe just one other alternative scenario. I've never done this, but I see many individual appraisers will talk about doing some kind of a fee split arrangement with a trainee. I just ran some really rough numbers, and you could play with the inputs and the scenarios, a lot. But if a trainee were participating or contributing on one appraisal a day, and they were getting a 30% fee split going to them for their contribution on that, and if an appraiser had an average fee of $400 for an assignment, that would work out to just a little over. It was almost $29,000 annually that a supervisor would be paying a trainee on a fee split basis in those scenarios. And you could tweak those a million different ways, but it was interesting to see that math calculated out very similarly to about what a $12 an hour, salary or wage would be to a trainee. It's just interesting, like as you put the total cost all in of PAREA up against what you're paying potentially as a supervisor, assuming you're compensating a trainee. And I've always felt like you should. The math really becomes kind of a no-brainer, even if you were to help or provide or pay for that as the trainer.
We were talking about this before starting the episode, and I mean the 30% split anticipates that you can use the trainee in the process, and that is maybe for some firms or folks that are set up this way to do this, or work with particular sets of clients that uniquely allow trainees into the process. Great, that works really well. But my goodness, I think probably the odds are that you don't work with clients in the way that you serve as the typical appraiser out there that allows trainees to participate in the process to get that and earn that 30% that might be given there. So, I think a particular, I problem that I have felt when I'm watching these hearings is talking about the cost of this. And I have heard several, not appraisers, but politicians or bureaucrats that are commenting on the appraisal process and PAREA as a solution to handling some of the problems that exist in the industry, saying, well, $8,000 or $9,000 is not accessible. That's to folks. This is it just costs too much. It needs to cost way less. And I think the example that you've just provided is that appraisers right now training folks themselves, not to count the time spent doing this, but just a $12 an hour is $30,000, $36,000, $40,000 that they'd be investing over a year and a half time. $9,000 is nowhere near that to get a license in hand. So I think the value of it with that analysis is somewhere between $9,000 and $35,000 in my mind. And if you look at it from the student's perspective, I don't want to get too heady here, but the appraiser in me wants to look at this from like a net present value perspective, that if the average income for an appraiser around the country is somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000, you have a $9,000 cash outlay. And even if you give a $50,000 kind of limited salary in the first 2 years, and then you kind of hit your 75, you earn 75 in years 3 through 10. If I apply like a 15 or 20% discount rate, that cash flow to me is worth something like $225,000. So this is a really valuable thing. And I only say those numbers to quantify the value of any education that teaches you a career or how to fish, and that's what this stuff does here. And so the value is way, way more than the $4,400 that the Institute charges per module here. And I think honestly, it should be quite a bit more. When I had, just guessing when I was hearing about this in the beginning, thinking that it would be in excess of 10,000, maybe somewhere in the $12,000 range is what I thought the cost ought to be. And so the problem isn't what the cost of PAREA is by my I think the two examples that we're looking at it, the revenue stream or the salary revenue stream that you can generate from becoming an appraiser and getting that license in hand. Also, what it costs an appraiser to bring on someone new into their practice. Both of those things say that 9,000 is an easy consideration there. So when you look at the cost of PAREA and the value that someone looking to expand their practice and hire a PAREA graduate, when you look at it from the student's perspective and the return for the next 10 years once they have license in hand of that average salary, no brainer, absolutely. The PAREA cost is worth it, and quite a bit more, probably 50% more, I think is easily justified. So the problem isn't the cost of PAREA. The problem is the access to funds to pay for PAREA. It is worth people to get an appraisal license for $9,000. That is very clear to me. It is just how to get the funds to cover that, because most students won't have access to $10,000. It's why they want to become an appraiser. They're looking for a career to make money. And so we've got to, I think the real problem is to solve how to access or make funds for PAREA more accessible. And it's sort of a crazy thing to think about in my mind in this world of student loans and how easy they are to get. This is an extremely affordable by comparison cost with a really rewarding salary or annuity on the back end. And I think that's what we need to address.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Mark. And maybe two thoughts that I've had as you were talking. One, going back to our conversation with Kelly from the Appraisal Foundation, she talked about in her own personal life having made sacrifices to go back and get a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree. And, it was her perspective on the value of education, I think, aligns with what you were saying. And then it's certainly in this world where I can go borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a degree that may or may not be very marketable, or even if I want to go and be an educator on, history or English or something, and not to disparage those, but the salaries that come out of, certain lines of work are equal to or less than what we're talking about here. And I can borrow a whole lot of money in a college education scenario to go get those that are going to pay me a teacher salary or something equivalent. Here, we're talking about a fraction of that cost at less than $10,000, like you rightly point out, where any advertising I'm seeing, in fact, I just saw for a county assessor's office here locally an ad that, depending on the level of certification, years in the business and stuff, but it was starting right in that range of what you're talking about, $70,000 to $75,000, plus the benefits and stuff that were offered there. And so it's a cost-effective way in terms of knowing or having a pretty good idea of what I can expect to earn, as a newly certified appraiser coming out of that PAREA approach. And I think the good news is PAREA's early on in the process. There are some funds available even today to be had there, and more that we know about that are coming online that aren't, formally put out there or, ready for consumption just yet. But it's been kind of interesting to see that, it's not that the only option forward is to borrow the money or, have it on hand, yourself. I reached out to and was talking with a college counselor, and he was explaining that that for those institutions that are federally accredited to receive college, student aid, Pell Grants, student loans, all of those sorts of things, he's like, man, there are 1,000,001 options available for those education providers. I don't think that PAREA yet fits into that category as far as who it's offered from in this moment, though that may change. But he did point out that banks and credit unions and other financial institutions do have regularly or kind of structured lending programs that could fit into this bucket if borrowing the money were the pathway to go. But we are aware of a few scholarship type of programs that are available out there. In fact, you were just looking up some of the information from the Appraisal Institute, right?
Yeah. So I think this would probably be a good jumping off point to cover some of the monies that are available. I think one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is that, I think stakeholders around the industry are very interested in seeing this program succeed, an alternate pathway that that overcomes some of the obstacles that have existed for the last several decades on the traditional pathway. And so people want this to succeed. They want to invest in it for a whole lot of reasons. And so, Jeff, you rightly pointed that I think a lot more scholarship dollars are going to be available, but that shouldn't be our only way to get access to funds to cover the investment in this education for individuals. In federal funding, student loan funding is the type of thing that I think should be made available for this, probably a decent little small business opportunity for someone. But so the Appraisal Institute's Education and Relief Foundation, for those not involved with the Appraisal Institute, probably don't know a lot about it, but they cover a lot and offer a lot of scholarships, not just for Appraisal Institute members. It is something like $50,000 a year in college tuition scholarships that are awarded. I actually, little known fact, back in 2001, I think I received one of those from them, which I still am very grateful for to this day, covering college tuition, graduate school stuff. And but they have just this year are beginning to fund PAREA. There is a $60,000 yearly allotment for PAREA scholarships at about $2,500 per applicant or recipient. That works out to about 24 individuals that are 24 spots to receive $2,500 towards PAREA. Won't cover all of it, but certainly significantly reduces it. So really, really good there. The Appraisal Diversity Initiative that we're involved in, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Urban League, Appraisal Institute, many, I think it's 4 years now, has been up and going, but they help cover a lot of the qualifying education that helps you get in and get ready to jump into PAREA. I think that PAREA will be part of the scholarship funds, but as I understand it now, it is not. It doesn't include it yet, but I think it is coming. And that is only available to people who go through the kind of the entry point at the beginning of becoming a trainee and taking the pre-qualified education. So, Jeff, I think there are a few others, or at least one other to mention here with the NAA. Do you want to cover that one with us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and all of these aren't yet of a scale that are going to be available to everybody wanting to come in. But one other professional organization that I'm also a part of is the NAA, the National Association of Appraisers, and they have a scholarship fund called the George R. Harrison Scholarship Fund, which, similar to what you just described with the Appraisal Institute, makes scholarship funds available for qualifying education and also for PAREA. It's a newer fund. I've been involved with some of the conversations on how to distribute, those funds as the applications and requests come in. But I think it's important for people to know what funds are currently available. In some of the kind of off the record conversations that we've had, I've been made aware that other funds are being aggregated and are going to be coming online. And as they do, certainly I'll be excited to, put some information out and point people to those, because even in spite of kind of this financial analysis that we've laid out, that that the cost of PAREA is reasonable, to the extent that there's funds available. And like you say, man, I remember going to college, being the poor starving student. Now I'm just a poor starving appraiser, it feels like some days, but having access to any funds that help get you the education and the investment in yourself that you need is tremendously valuable. And I received, some grants and stuff that, just like you, to this day, I'm very grateful for. It made a really big impact in getting my career off the ground and headed in the direction that it has. So we're excited to share the information as it comes, as far as new funds that become available. I'm confident there will be more.
With this outlay, whether you are earning scholarships, investing just the time and have it covered entirely, which probably isn't too many folks, taking out loans or borrowing from whatever to get through it, or an appraiser that's investing in someone and waiting for them to get the licensure and then kind of bring them into their practice. I think that the question is there should someone be doing this right now? The real estate market is not very good, and newsflash, the appraisal market also isn't very good, and hasn't been now for quite a while. Just transactions are down, and so you have a lot of appraisers that are not doing work anymore. So is this a good time? Do we have too many appraisers? I think my perspective would be that getting educated and getting ready for an upcycle. We are through an extended historical down cycle, which likely gets a lot of pent up demand and brings a pretty healthy and long upcycle that will be coming down the road. And so I think there's reason there to say, hey, it's bad right now, but that actually kind of guarantees that it's going to be pretty good in the relative future here. And if it takes 12 months or more to get through PAREA, well, that timing works out pretty good. You aren't graduating today, the day you enter the program. You're graduating in a very different environment when you finish. And the second thing is that, the average age of the appraiser, 62, 63. If you're new to this, you haven't heard it, but you will hear it all the time. And then we have a ton of change. And so if you have a lot of folks that are near retirement and a lot of change in our industry is coming, I know a lot of folks that are saying, I think it's about time for me to hang up my appraisal shoes here and enjoy retirement or whatever. Plus a lot of people that have just left the industry during this really downtime. We've seen a lot of that. So I think the appraisal population is going to be less in 12 months when we kind of take a measuring stick back on the last 12 months. I think people are just by nature of the industry, the age of the average appraiser and whatnot. I think there is going to be some infill needed to replace some of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's one aspect in life I don't mind being below average is that of the average appraiser's age in the moment. But I think you make a good point. And one of the challenges that the appraiser profession and the population as a whole always has is that of responding quickly to changes in demand in the market for appraisal services. And PAREA helps a little bit to narrow that gap, I think, because whereas pre-PAREA, the only option was find somebody to train me. And when things are busy, people have a hard time slowing down to train somebody. When things are slow, appraisers worry about paying their own bills and not bringing somebody else on. You're exactly right. Things are very slow today. Interest rates and current levels of transactions are not going to stay where they are today. And if I were to start the process today, I wouldn't likely be in the market as a certified appraiser for at least 12 months and probably more than that. And every projection I'm seeing now is that things are not going to get worse from here between now and the next 12 to 18 months, going forward. And so it helps provide the pathway for people to get in. You got to be able to fund it or finance it or pay for the cost of doing it. If PAREA is your pathway, but I think those funds increasingly will help ease that burden for people coming in.
Well, I totally agree. So as we wrap up here, Jeff, what would I do if I were an aspiring PAREA student or in the program now? I would be applying for scholarships that are available with the AIERF, Appraisal Institute Education Relief Foundation, NAA. I would be keeping close eyes on the Appraisal Diversity Initiative to see what opportunities arise there, along with the Appraisal Foundation and others, and just keep abreast of new funds that might be available. And then most importantly, I would be reaching out to current appraisers that look for sponsorship or some connection to them to open discussions about covering PAREA. Forward this podcast with that opening email. Say, hey, this sounds pretty good, Mr. Appraiser, Mrs. Appraiser. What do you think about this idea? I am aspiring, sure would like a great place to land and learn professionally from someone. And see if an arrangement can be made to help get these things taken care of. That's kind of the way that I would approach it. I don't know about you, Jeff.
Well, you're pretty enterprising, Mark. I like that. But, we had a conversation with the ADI group several months ago now, but a lot of that was centered around what value can an aspiring appraiser, a trainee, bring to an existing appraiser. And I think you point out a very good point here. And that's always been my advice is, what can somebody bring to the table for an existing appraiser? And if it's a license right out of the gate, it may be familiarity with technology that you would gain in going through the process. I think anybody who was interested in hiring an appraiser would seriously consider this as an option. Like I said, my brother is certainly, in that camp, and I talking to others that are as well. And so, if you're an aspiring appraiser, you might just be surprised at the reception that might be had there. And whether you can arrange or negotiate to have them help cover that cost and then pay it back, or have them cover that cost upon employment or something, or just knowing that I've got a place to land, giving you the confidence to, borrow the funds to go through PAREA. There are a lot of different ways it can be done, a lot of different ways it will be, I'm sure, but they all can lead to a successful appraisal career. And in spite of its ups and downs, I've been blessed by it, and I'm grateful to be in this space. And, we want to see it have a bright future going forward for the next generation of appraisers and for the profession as a whole. And PAREA is still evolving, and people aren't yet in large waves in the market having come through it. But these are all steps that help get it there. And I think your approach, Mark, of reaching out and connecting with other appraisers, even if your plan is to go through PAREA, is very very practical, very wise.
Yeah, Jeff, I think your supplement to that, which is sort of add some bullet points of what value you think you can bring, and there are loads of items from marketing assistance if you happen to be maybe younger, or just technologically adept, social media adept, whatever that is. I think the education that folks are going to get as it relates to appraisal theory for PAREA is going to be vastly above the average trainee coming through. Just the depth and breadth of the experience and the knowledge that are coming. What may be missing is that professional guidance that the appraiser can bring, in expanding a practice in a firm by bringing one of these folks on. So I think those are great things. And just say, hey, Mark and Jeff said this would be a good idea. You ought to do it. See what you get.
Yeah, it'll blow the doors off for sure. No, absolutely. Well, it's one of the last benefits to point out there is simply his interest. I was talking with a commercial appraiser yesterday who's very interested in artificial intelligence, that AI, not the Appraisal Institute. But he was talking about using it to write neighborhood descriptions and do things. And one of the things that kind of came up in that conversation is it takes a lot of the mental load off of an appraiser trying to write a big narrative report. If you get a lot of support getting most of that done, and then you can tweak what the output is coming from AI. The same thing can apply for PAREA and helping an appraiser. If the appraiser doesn't have to stop and teach somebody from ground zero all of the appraisal theory and practice, how to write a report, whether it's narrative or in forms, but they have somebody that is 80 or 90% of the way to being a fully rounded appraiser, like you say, some of the professional development, that alone, I think, can be a significant benefit to the appraisers out there that may be a potential partner or employer or something for those looking to get into the profession. So it's interesting times, but I'd encourage you to move forward and pursue it if it's a passion for you, for sure.
I agree, Jeff. Well, that's a wrap. Enjoyed talking about this. Let us know if we can be any more help on this topic and point you to where to find funds or any of that in wherever you're listening to this podcast, in notes or comments or whatever. Look forward to covering a few more PAREA topics here in the next upcoming episodes.
Maybe on to something else. We won't only be the PAREA guys forever, but it's been fun for sure. So I appreciate it, Mark.
All right.